Well, what's up, Parker Hill Church Online? I am so honored to be with you here today. I got to tell you that in this season, I just find a lot of hope right now, seeing how churches are working together in incredible ways to bring hope and life into our communities and all across our state. And I can assuredly tell you that LCBC Church is standing arm in arm with you right now in this season. We are praying for you. We are praying for your incredible staff, and we're praying for you individually as you lead people and as you invest in your communities and as you live right now in this season with hope and with faith. I don't know about you, but I can tell you for me, at least personally, this season has brought with it a mixed bag of emotions. I'll give you some examples. I mean, like on one hand, I have found myself really, really grateful for a little bit more time that I've been able to have with my family, and yet living right next to that, on the other hand, I cannot wait to get back to the office and kind of into my routine. Another example is I've just found myself right now feeling frustrated about some of the plans that I had that have now been canceled. Actually, this week, in just a couple of days from now, my wife Jenny and I, we were supposed to be leaving to go on a once-in-a-lifetime kind of trip full of palm trees and warm weather and beaches and little umbrellas and drinks, all that kind of stuff. And none of that is happening now. And so I'm frustrated by that, to be honest with you. And yet, at the same time, living right next to that, I'm just really grateful in this season because I know that it could be so much worse. And so, listen, man, my guess is that many of you, you've had those same kinds of conflicting emotions emerging over the last several weeks. Maybe for you, you've had a graduation that's been canceled now or put on hold, or maybe it's the dance recitals for your children that have been put on hold, or for some of you, you've had to put your wedding on hold, and some of you, you've lost a job. Some of you, you've lost time, and some of you, you've lost your investments. And so, look, it's all really just a way of saying this. I cannot think of a more relevant series to be in right now here at Parker Hill than this series that we started last week called On Edge. Because at varying degrees, we've all been on edge in this season. And last week, Pastor Mark got us kicked off, and he kind of framed out the conversation that we're going to be having over these next few weeks. And I think that this content over these next couple of weeks is going to be so helpful, particularly in this season that we're in right now. And today, I just want to shine the spotlight on one particular symptom of being on edge that we have all experienced at some level. And that is really simply put, worry and anxiety. And so today, that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about worry and anxiety. And to get us started, I think it's important to recognize that anxiety tends to work on a continuum. It kind of works on a spectrum in our lives. You know, for a lot of us, actually for all of us at some point or another, if you kind of start with just the basic of the spectrum, which is just fear, we've all experienced fear. So you have fear on one hand, and fear is usually related to an object. This is why we almost always use the word of whenever, after we use the word afraid. In other words, I'm afraid of, we are afraid of something. There's an object. It's sort of tied to a concrete thing, right? We're afraid of snakes. We're afraid of heights. We're afraid of spiders. Anybody tracking with me right now, right? We're afraid of getting into a car accident. Apparently the Dallas Cowboys are afraid of winning Super Bowls. I know, I just had to get that in. I'm sorry. But here's the thing, man. If fears go unchecked, then it usually grows into worry. And worry's a little bit different because worry is a little bit more abstract. We tend to follow the word worry with the word about. In other words, I'm worried about something. It's about the potential unknowns out there. We're worried about a situation at work. We're worried about failing a test. We're worried about a relationship that feels like it's on the rocks right now. We're worried about how our kids are going to do being out of school for this long and how it's going to be transitioning back to school next fall. And worry, if that gets left unchecked, that's when it turns to anxiety. And anxiety is this pervasive, sort of perpetual, low-grade hum that's always in the background. It's more than seasonal. Anxiety begins to distort reality. It actually begins to affect the way we see life. It affects the quality of life. So, we're afraid of getting into a car accident, so we become worried about a trip that we're about to take. And then anxiety kicks in and we stop saying, we just say to ourselves, I'm going to stop taking highways. I'm just going to take back roads. And now the actual quality of our life begins to get redirected because of it. And the stats on this are just crazy. I don't know if you knew this or not, but anxiety is the most commonly diagnosed mood disorder in the United States. And that's just for those who are being seen for it. This is crazy. I actually read this a few months ago. There was a study that was done by Psychology Today a few years ago, and they said this, that the average high school student today has the same rate of anxiety as a psychiatric patient did from the 1950s. In other words, what was crazy has now just become normal to us. It's just the air we breathe when it comes to anxiety. Up to 31%. So that's almost 1 out of every 3 people. Up to 31% of people have experienced the symptoms of anxiety. I mean, you look around you, that means that there are people all over the place that are dealing with this. And if you really want to kind of get honest, what all this just says is it says that either you're dealing with this, with fear and worry and anxiety at this level, or you know someone who is. You know someone who does. And it's probably people really close to you. And the truth is, guys, man, look, if we're being honest, we are all constantly bouncing around between that continuum, between fear and worry and anxiety. At one of those places, we're always facing one of those things, right? And it's exhausting. In fact, probably the way I would say it is this: it is exhausting to continually live in the what ifs at the expense of what is. In other words, it's possible, isn't it? You've faced this, you've experienced this at some level. It's possible to be so consumed with like, what if this happens? What if that happens? Like, what if this, what if that? That it robs us of the joy of living fully present in the what is, the moment that we have right in front of us. And I think it's interesting that when you talk to people about worry and about fears and about anxiety, that they tend to use words like, I don't know, it just feels heavy. At times, it feels weighty. It feels like a burden. I just think it's interesting that when we talk about worries and fears and anxieties, we tend to use words that carry the idea of like a weight. I don't know what your what ifs are in your life right now that might be weighing you down, but I know you have some that feel like a heavy weight that you're carrying around. Like a big rock that just kind of carries around. Like, I don't know what your what if, maybe for some of you, it's like, well, what if my kids get sick? That's the weight that you're carrying. Like, what if my kids get sick? Or what if my aging parents get sick? Or what if things don't return to normal? And maybe for you, that's not it, but maybe for you, it's even more than that. It's like, well, what if I don't get into the school that I want to get into now that this whole school year has been kind of messed up? And what if I don't get into the college I wanted to? And what if I get rejected by that group of people? And what if they don't want to go out with me anymore? And so we continue to kind of add up these what ifs, carrying around this weight. And then for some of you, it's like, what if my job gets cut? And what if our savings run out? And what if they get elected this November, or whoever the they is for you? And what if we can't have children? And then some of you are like, what if we have more children? For you, they're like, there's not a big enough rock for that one. You got enough as it goes right now. You're feeling stressed. But of course, we never hold our fears and our worries and our anxieties out in the open like this, do we? We never just carry around the weight of our fears and worries out like this. We try to hide them. This is what we do all the time, and no one had to teach you to do this. You just kind of knew to do this. You sort of intuitively picked this up, that we take the things that we're worried about, our fears, anxieties, and we hide them. We store them away, and we don't let other people see them. But that certainly doesn't mean that we're not still carrying them. And we carry them around like a heavy weight. And every now and then we'll peek back and we'll just make sure, we'll make sure they're still there, but they are still there. And some of you, man, you know what this feels like today. You know what it feels like to be on edge like this. You know what it feels like to carry around the weight of fear and worry and anxiety. And some of you, you're weighed down today with a heavy bag of worries and fears and anxiety. And I just want you to know it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this. And so here's why I want to talk about this today. Because we're dealing with it, and God has something to say about it that can move us towards freedom. I want you to know it can get better. That you don't have to live life just settling for carrying a heavy backpack of worries and fears and anxiety. And so to move forward with all this today, I just want to look at some words that were written by one of Jesus' first followers. His name was Peter. And Peter had a front row seat to Jesus' life. Peter was there all those times that Jesus says, do not be afraid. He heard him. And Peter was there when Jesus said, come to me if you are burdened, if you're carrying around a heavy weight in your life, come to me and I will give you rest. Peter heard those words. And Peter then wrote some letters to some of the followers of Jesus that he knew were on edge. He knew that they were facing their own fears and their own worries and their own anxiety because their commitment to Jesus was costing them something. And the future was uncertain for Peter, and he wanted them to know that God speaks into our fears and our worries and anxiety. Look what Peter says. This is so cool. Peter starts, he wants to dip into this idea and this topic of fear and anxiety, but this is how he starts. He starts by saying, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God. And at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. Now, I don't know what the very first listeners, the people who got this letter in the first century were thinking, but I would imagine some of them heard this little statement read and maybe they scratched their head and began to think for a second and be like, Peter, that's great, real quick. I love that. I love that you're talking about humility. That's a great thing. Don't want to be prideful people, want to be humble people. That's all great and all that. But Peter, real quick, I'm not struggling with pride. I'm struggling with fear. I'm struggling with worry right now. I'm struggling with anxiety. So why are you talking about humility? But Peter starts the conversation by talking about humility. And I think there's a reason for that. You see, I think our fears and anxieties tend to be rooted in one of three areas. I think for some of us, our fear and anxiety, it comes from our conditioning. In other words, it's just sort of the circumstances you grew up in. See, some of you were raised in environments, you were raised in homes where fear and anxiety and worry, that was just kind of the name of the game. Maybe you were born into a family of worriers. Maybe you were raised in a sort of a climate of fear, like there's a big bad world out there. Don't go out there, be careful. You always gotta be on your guard. And life was almost treated like it was a threat. What's interesting about that is, I don't know if you knew this or not, but a child is actually 7 times more likely to have anxiety, to be anxious if they live with a parent who suffers from anxiety. In other words, you can kind of say that anxiety is contagious. You can catch it. And some of you, that was the conditions that you grew up in and you just kind of caught it. You live with fear and worry and anxiety because it was conditions. For some of you, it wasn't your conditions. For some of you, your fear and anxiety and your worries, it's actually rooted in concealing. Maybe for you, it's a struggle that you're ashamed of, and so you do not want anyone else to know, and you put it in that bag, and you hide it from other people, and it's weighing you down. Or maybe it's not a struggle that you're actively kind of working through. Maybe for you, it's a choice that you made in the past that you do not want anyone else to know about. And you live with this constant sense of anxiety, like what if I get exposed? What if the real me, like what if people find out about what I did? Or what if I mess up again? What will everybody think? And I just want you to know, man, you were not made to live a life of concealing like that. That is a miserable existence. And you cannot, it's like it erodes our souls when we hide and we conceal. And hiding and concealing will always lead to fear and anxiety of being outed, of being exposed. And so for some of us, it's our conditioning. For some of us, it's rooted in concealing. And then the third sort of root, I think, for some of us of where our fear and anxiety tends to come from is just from our controlling. You see, control, and when we kind of live with a sense of we need to control everything, what happens is we try to manage everything around us. Controllers fear all the things they can't control, even though it is a complete illusion. Like we know that, right? Like rationally speaking, we know that we cannot control life. It is an absolute illusion. And yet for some of us, we cannot let go of trying to control every little detail of our life, every little detail of our spouse's life, every little detail of our home, every little detail of our community, every little detail of our kids' lives. And it leaves us burdened. It leaves us carrying around a deep weight of worry and fear because we're trying to control everything that ultimately we can't control. In every one of these, it doesn't matter what the root is, whether it's your conditioning, your concealing, or controlling, every one of those will rob you of peace. And you can't experience fullness of life when you don't reflect on where your own fears and anxieties and worries come from. And see, I think Peter talks about humility. I think he opens up this conversation about anxiety by talking about humility because the first step towards freedom in any area of life, particularly freedom from fear and worry and anxiety, is to have the humility to say, I can't do this on my own. The thoughts that are weighing me down, the weight that I'm carrying, the burdens that I'm holding on to right now, the worries that I'm holding on to, all of that that's weighing me down, I'm trying to control the people and circumstances around me. It's heavy and it's pervasive, and I cannot do it on my own. That's humility. And then after Peter makes a statement about humility, he gets so simple. I love this, man. He gets so simple and so practical with what he says next that it's almost easy to dismiss it. But man, we dare not miss the power of what Peter says next. This is what he says in the very next statement in 1 Peter 5:7. He says, so give all your worries and cares to God. There it is. Give all your worries and your cares to God. Now, I don't know how you feel when you read a statement like this, but being honest, there's a part of me that thinks, wait, that's all, Peter? Like, that's all you got? Just give your worries and cares to God? Like, that's the solution? That's the plan? Because that sounds like a nice little idea that you could put on a bumper sticker on a calendar somewhere. But my fears and my worries and my anxieties, they're a little bit more complicated than that. But then I step back. Anytime I start to feel that way, I just step back and I remember who wrote this. Peter wrote this. The same Peter who had been thrown in prison. The same Peter who had been beaten, who had had his life threatened, who lived under the constant weight of persecution. The same Peter who almost assuredly lost friends because of his faith. The same Peter who almost assuredly lost money and had economic implications because of his faith. It's this Peter who speaks about what it means to cast your cares onto God, to give all of your cares and worries to God. So listen, when Peter speaks about worry and fear and anxiety, I'm sitting up straight and I'm listening because he knows something about living with a weight like this. And he says, I have discovered something that you need to know. And what's really interesting is that the word that Peter uses that's translated to give, when it says to give your cares, to give your anxieties, to give your worries over to God, other translations can translate that word as cast or throw. Because the word Peter used there, it actually means to hurl, to throw, to cast. And it often means to like violently throw or fling something with great force. In other words, Peter's saying, you can take all this bag, all the things that are weighing you down, all of it. And he's saying, you're going to have to throw it. You're going to have to hurl this thing. You're not just going to be able to gently just kind of hand it over to God. You got to volitionally, willfully make a decision to throw it to God. And in fact, the word that Peter used there that's translated to cast or to throw or, to give, it was used only one other time in the entire New Testament. And it's when people threw their coats onto the colt or the donkey that Jesus rode into Jerusalem with the week before he died. And I think Peter's being really deliberate here with using this word. See, he was there, and he saw what it looked like to throw something onto something or someone who is stronger than you to carry you forward. In other words, I think what Peter's wanting us to know is that we are not designed to carry the burden of worry and anxiety by ourselves. So let's just get really, really practical here for a second. What does it mean to cast our worries? If Peter's saying that this is the key, if this is the hinge point of finding peace when we feel like we're on edge, to throw and to cast our worries and our anxieties onto God, well, what does that even mean? I actually think there's kind of three real practical ways that we cast our worries onto God. I think first is this. We cast our worries by naming them. We cast our worries by naming them. I mean, think about it. It just kind of makes logical sense. You cannot cast something, you cannot throw something off of you without first acknowledging that it's there, without first naming that it's there. And I think one of the most helpful things we can do is to sit down and just name the things that have us weighed down with worry right now. That name the things, just sit down and write them down, just voice them, to get them out. Man, I'm worried about this. Man, I'm fearful of this. Man, I'm anxious about this right now. I'm afraid of these things. See, I think sometimes we think that naming those fears, those weights that we might be carrying around, those what-ifs that we might be carrying around, I think sometimes we think that by naming them, we will give them power. That's not the case. You actually rob it of its power when you name it and say, this is in me, these are the things I'm scared of right now, and I just got to put it out there. And you rob them of their power because now you've gotten it out, and you can almost see how ridiculous it is. You detach yourself from it, and you can see it objectively for what it is. And naming our worries sets us up for, I think, the second key to casting our worries on God, and it's this. We cast our worries by praying. So we cast our worries by naming them. We also cast our worries by praying. You know what anxiety is? Anxiety is prayer in reverse. In other words, anxiety takes a small issue and makes it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's all in our head. We just keep playing it over and over again, and it gets bigger and bigger. Prayer makes issues smaller and smaller and smaller. Why? Because in prayer, we take our worries, we take our concerns, we take our fears to the God who is greater than all things, the God who spoke and the universe was made, the God who is more magnificent and expansive than anything ever created. And we hold our lives and we hold our worries in context to this expansive, grand, great God. And all of a sudden it gets smaller. And what do we pray about when we take our worries to God? Well, another one of the very first followers of Jesus, his name was Paul. He told us what to pray about when it comes to this. This is what he says in Philippians 4:6. And he says, don't worry about anything. You want to talk about worry? Let's talk about worry. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. And then he tells us how. He says, if you want to know what to pray about, here it is. Ready? Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. And I love that because I just feel like that's so simple. I think the way you can kind of sum it up is this. If you want to know what to talk to God about, it's this. Talk to God about what you don't know and thank God for what you do know. Talk to God about what you don't know and thank God for what you do know. What you don't know. God, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with my work. I don't know what's going to happen with the economy. I don't know if we're going to be okay. God, I don't know if my project's going to go well. God, I don't know how my kids are going to be in light of all this. God, I don't know how much time my aging parents have left. God, here's all my I don't knows. Here's all my what ifs, God. I need to come to you with them. But don't stop there. Then thank God for what you do know. God, I may not know all of those things, but God, here's what I do know. I do know, God, that I'm right here today in this moment. I do know you've given me breath in my lungs and life today. God, I don't know what's going to happen with my job, but what I do know is I have a job today. Thank you. God, I don't know what's going to happen with the economy. I know that I have a home right now. Thank you. God, I don't know what's going to happen with our health or with the health of my family, but I know here we are today and we're healthy. Thank you. I do know that. See, guys, we cast our worries by praying, by talking to God about what we don't know and thanking him for what we do. So we cast our worries by naming them, we cast our worries by praying, and lastly, we cast our worries by sharing. By sharing. There's another passage in the New Testament where it just says real simply, it says, carry each other's burdens. Carry each other's burdens. And implicit to that idea is that we have to allow our burdens to be carried by someone else. We have to allow our burdens to be shared. And for some of you, that may be a trusted friendship that it's time for you to open up. It's time for you to share some of the burdens, some of the what-ifs that you've been carrying around because you've never shared it with someone else. For some of you, that might be, your group that you're in here at Parker Hill, and you just need to get with your group and you go, hey guys, I've got some what-ifs that I've been carrying around and they've been heavy. I just need to get them out and I need to share them with you. And then for some of you, I'm going to just dig a little bit deeper here real quick. For some of you, this goes a little bit like a layer deeper because you need to figure out what the root of all of this is for you. Is it the conditioning? Is it concealing? Or is it rooted in control? And for that, listen, for some of you, the best decision that you might make today is it's time for you to actually talk to a counselor about some of this. It's time for you to talk to a counselor. And even in this season right now, when we're quarantined and we've got stay-at-home orders and all that, and counseling offices might be closed, there are counselors who are offering services online that you can still do this. And so this is not a time to back down from this. For some of you, it might be a little bit deeper than just sharing with a friend. You need to get to the root of some of this. And let me just kind of soapbox on this counseling thing for a second. I'm always amazed at how averse some people are to counseling. And yet we would not bat an eye at getting coaching to become the best executive or the best manager we can at our place of work. Or we wouldn't bat an eye to getting coaching or help to get in the best shape physically. Or we wouldn't bat an eye at getting coaching when it comes to learning a musical skill or something like that. So why in the world would it be any different when it comes to our souls, when it comes to our mental health, and surrounding ourselves with people who can help us move forward? And that's all counseling is. And let me just kind of one last thing with this, because I just feel like I need to say this for some of you, and maybe it's just for one person right now, but I need to say this. One other piece with this that I just want to address is that for some of you, the most extreme end of that anxiety spectrum that we talked about, you're there. And the anxiety is pervasive right now, and it's suffocating, and it is invasive. And it may be valuable for some of you right now to get on some medication to help you get back to a healthy baseline. And the reason I feel like I want to say that to you is because I want you to know there is no shame in that. That doesn't mean if you need to get on some meds to help you get back to a healthy baseline because your anxiety has been pervasive and invasive in your life, I want you to know that does not mean you lack faith. That doesn't mean that you've somehow stopped trusting God. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is to get all forms of help that you need to get back to a baseline so that your mind is clear so you can move towards health. So guys, look, man, this is what I love. Here we are 2,000 years later after Peter wrote these words to men and women who apparently had their own fears and worries and anxiety, who apparently were on edge themselves. And here we are 2,000 years later, and these words are, and this wisdom is just as relevant today. But Peter wasn't done. He wasn't done with this last little statement. In fact, he ends this sentence, about casting our cares onto God with this revolutionary idea. This is what he says. He says, so remember, give all your worries and your cares to God. And then he says this, so great, for he cares for you. He cares for you. I just want you to think about how powerful that one simple idea is. Because doesn't so much of our fear and our worry and our anxiety get fueled by an unrest of what is going to happen to us in the future? And maybe for some of us, way deep down inside, we are afraid that we're not going to be okay and that we're all alone. And Peter says, I just want you to know, there's one thing that I have come to know for certain, and it is that the God who knows our futures cares for us. And for some of you, man, I just know because maybe you've been around church for a long time, or maybe you grew up with the whole Jesus, God, Bible, church thing, and maybe for some of you, a statement like that God cares for you has just become vanilla. It's just kind of like oatmeal. It's like, okay, yeah, right, God cares. I just want you to hear that and consider it like it's the very first time you've ever heard that idea. There is a God who cares for you, who is intimately involved in your life, a God who knows your inmost thoughts, who knows your deepest fears, who knows your worries, your anxieties, and says to you, bring it to me. Do not carry this alone. Throw it onto me. I want to carry it for you. And I just wonder if Peter, when he wrote those words all those years ago, if his mind flashed back for just a moment to what he saw just a few years before he wrote those words, because he was there. He watched Jesus carry the burden of a cross. He saw him willingly go to a cross, which means that Jesus wants to carry our burdens. Peter saw just how far Jesus was willing to go to demonstrate his care and his love for us. But not only that, I wonder, I don't know, but I just wonder if Peter in that moment, he then thought of what happened just a few days after he watched Jesus die, when all of a sudden he stood face to face with his Savior, in person, in flesh and blood. And he couldn't explain it, and it didn't make any sense, but he could not deny it either. And if Jesus could beat death, Peter knew that carrying our burdens would not be a problem for this Savior. And from that day on, Peter lived with a peace that comes from knowing that although I do not have control of the future, and although my what ifs, I still have them, although I can't guarantee what the future holds, what I do know is there is a God who cares for me and invites me to throw my fears, to hurl them, to cast them, all of my fears and my worries and my anxieties onto his shoulders. Which leaves us with a question and maybe a little bit of a decision. Will you keep carrying your own fears and anxieties? Will you keep throwing them on your shoulder, carrying them yourself weighed down? Or would you be willing to cast your fears and anxiety on the one who cares for you? Or maybe another way of saying it is just simply this. Maybe the most important question you just have to ask yourself today is, will you allow the one who cares for you to carry you? Will you allow the one who cares for you to carry you? The one who says to you, I know what you're carrying. Cast it onto me. And yes, that's going to mean that you have to name it. Yep, you're going to have to acknowledge it. And yeah, that's going to mean you have to talk to me about it. But just talk to me about what you don't know and thank me for what you do. And that's going to mean you have to share it, to begin to open up about it, to get some people around you who you can share it and who are going to help you. But wouldn't the peace that you could experience on the other side of doing those things be so worth it? The band's going to sing a final song in just a moment. And I just love some of the lyrics of this song. It says this about Jesus. It says, Jesus, man, you are worthy of every song we could ever sing. Jesus, you are worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. You are worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. Guys, that is a reminder that we can throw our worries and our fears and our anxiety onto him. That when we are on edge, he is still worthy, and he is still strong enough, and he is powerful enough to carry us. So let's listen to these words as you consider for your own life what it looks like for you to allow the one who cares for you to carry you.